We all know how Gigachad looks like, but what about his political views? Interestingly, most people are going to project their own political views into a Gigachad. Oh, since I'm so correct all the time, the best specimen of humanity are going to agree with me. But that's a very biased way of going about things. I mean, what if the actual Gigachad has been Hassan Piker all along? What if elite human capital crowd are actually right and we're just copying chads that couldn't handle their power levels? Maybe a gigachad is really into mass migration, Marvel movies, and supporting the greatest ally? Maybe all of the highly educated people that have voted for Hitler actually have voted for somebody else? Maybe being a masculine man is really about being a proud male feminist? To figure this question out, we must conduct a neutral statistical analysis. Let's take measures across a series of domains and focus specifically on individuals in the top of performance who have disclosed their political beliefs. But first, we need to define what a gigachad is, and because of the inability to take exact measurements in some of the domains, I will define a gigachad as either being 2 standard deviations above a certain domain or as being the top percentile of what can be measured on a specific domain. While I'm not the first person to explore this topic, a Substack article has already predicted a gigachad's political ideology based on several domains, my video will greatly expand on the concept by including a wider range of them. But before that, I must shill an excellent website that I'm using myself, Legend. They offer shorts that cover the key concepts from books relevant today. If you don't have time to read a long book, you can listen to or read a human summary of it. With a promo code UberSoy15, you can get a 15% discount. The highest anybody else offered was 10%, but I took a personal cut to my earnings so that you could enjoy a better deal. So once again, legend.com, promo code UberSoy15. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a chad is overwhelming masculinity. I mean, just look at him. The dude must have been born inside of a gym. And guess who else goes to gym? That's right, fascists. As one shitlip from The Guardian wrote, the more self-actualized you become, the higher you are on the self-righteousness, blaming other people's problems on their failure to be as healthy as you. But again, that's mostly it, a collection of liberal opinions all complaining about the gym making people fascist. There's no direct statistics on gym attendance and political views, so we have to instead resort to proxies such as measures of masculinity and measures of health, with which I will start the video. Now, masculinity is an important part of the political divide. 78% of Republicans said that society looking to masculine men is a good thing, compared to less than half of the Democrats. Furthermore, 20% of Republicans said this is a bad thing, whereas almost half of the Democrats said the same. We also know that people with stronger upper bodies and lower pitch voices tend to be more right-wing than the average, but again, these are averages, not necessarily indicators of a top percentile. For that, we'll have to consort 2 separate studies specifically looking at percentiles of masculinity in relation to political ideology, and as you can see in both of these studies, the more masculine you are, the more right-wing you become, unless you're a woman. For instance, the support for the Dutch far-right PVV party increases by 3 times as masculinity score peaks. We'll take this and prior study as a base value to construct a new diagram of how things may look in the general population. Going with that information, I calculated that people at the top percentile of masculinity are about 68% right-wing and 32% left-wing. Also, this is not controlled for race, and given that wrestlers are at the top percentile of masculinity and they overwhelmingly back rightist candidates, I think my results are quite accurate. Also, it's not necessarily that the left doesn't produce masculinity, it's that its base is predominantly feminine. For instance, at the lowest percentile of masculinity, the voter leans left in over 80% of the cases and leans right in less than 20% of the cases, and that's again not breaking it down by race. And I feel like if we look at those under 25, the ratio is probably 90% to 10%, if not higher. Next, we've got health, and this is quite easy, because I don't need to do a complex calculation myself, it's already done for me, and so we can already establish that the political views of people with excellent health lean right in 71.5% of the cases, and lean left in 28.5% of the cases, which is quite similar to my previous finding. But as we all know, health is not purely physical. It's also mental. What does looking like a chad bring you if you ultimately think that you're the opposite gender?
Buddy, you were the one shaming me for buying more milk, and now you're shoving the image of sex down a sex-repulsed asexual's throat. Not a good look. And yes, I'm a proud Jesus freak.
Now, it's been well established that liberals and leftists have much worse mental health than conservatives and rightists, either be it serious mental disorders like autogenophilia or mood disorders like ADHD or frequent depression. The liberals absolutely rock these disorders. At the same time, rightoids are not completely immune from it either. In terms of mood swings and overall mental well-being, they're doing excellent. However, when it comes to serious disorders like schizophrenia and sociophobia, they seem to slightly increase the further right you go, but not to the same extent as they do among liberals and leftists. There seems to be a golden mean for mental health that is located to the right of regular conservatism, but to the left of extreme far right. Another striking point is the counterintuitive finding that higher news consumption and greater political interests are actually linked to better mental health. For instance, among conservatives, those with the highest levels of political engagement report good mental health in 73% of the time, whereas those with the least amount of political interest have lowest mental health rates. Only 60% report being mentally well. And so if the likelihood of a mentally healthy person to be very conservative is 65%, and we combine it with this factor that we've just uncovered, then approximately 79% of the mentally healthy politically engaged individuals will be on the right. Finally, let's finish this off by going over physical attractiveness and height. It doesn't correlate as well as previous factors, but there too is a causal relationship. And so when you look at height and physical attractiveness together, two standard deviations from the mean will give you a 54% chance of a person being a conservative, which is slightly higher than is the prevalence of conservatism and right-wingism in the general population. Next, we've got fertility rate, aka the ultimate test to the evolutionary strategy. What does it make a Gigachad if he can't reproduce? What's the point of being a Gigachad if you're not going to genetically pass it down the line? And guess what? There does happen to be a partisan gap in fertility rate. Now, it hasn't been as big of a deal one generation ago, but now it is becoming more and more significant. And so if we were to look at highest rates of fertility, one would estimate that about 80% of the super breeders, in quotation, would be Republican. In contrast, among those with the lowest fertility, just 10% are Republican. The Democrats are breeding themselves out of existence, but that's a story for another day. Another defining trait of the Gigachad is financial power. Wealth is a cornerstone of social influence. It opens doors, commands respect, and shapes one's ability to make an impact. Historically, the affluent have largely aligned with the political right, though this trend has been shifting since the early 2000s. Among billionaires, political allegiance has become increasingly fluid. In 2014, they overwhelmingly backed the Republicans. In 2020, they leaned slightly towards Biden, while by 2024, the majority have swung decisively in favor of Trump. This signals inconsistency and looking out for personal interests rather than common interests. So a Gigachad is also a narcissist. A good example is the election in New York.
Is that Ivana Trump?
Where the poor have supported Andrew Cuomo while the rich have supported Zoran Mandani, with the exception of the ultra-rich who still have supported Andrew Cuomo. Pretty insane, right? If you take a look at the wealthiest neighborhoods in Manhattan, Zoran Mandani barely wins anything, which is similar to the way he did with the educated vote. Really poorly with the undereducated, extremely well with those having a bachelor's degree, master's and doctorate not so much. Now, Kuomo versus Mandani is no commentary on the right versus the left. It's more an inside civil war within the ranks of the Democratic Party, with brown Muslim socialists on one side and bad boy liberals on the other.
Mr. Mandani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel? as mayor? I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples, or at their homes, or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not as a Jewish state?
No,
as a state with equal rights.
He won't
Not
say it has a
state.
right to exist as a Jewish state. Be very
And
clear
his
on
answer was no, he won't visit Israel.
The only thing that we can draw from this is that the ultra very rich are definitely not socialists. They are more towards the center, and they aren't ideological as much as those in the middle and the upper classes. They can flip politically the moment when they sense a benefit. An allegiance to a specific ideology is mostly a topic of obsession for the midwits and the higher tier midwits such as myself and you. These people are a lot more practical and they don't obsess over morality that much. What matters are interests. So I'm not going to do an analysis of the top percentile of income and voting outcomes because it's just fundamentally pointless. I'll move directly to the topic of intelligence instead. Now, while leftism generally correlates with higher intelligence, at least among whites, a recent study by Emil Kierkegaard demonstrates that at the upper ends of intelligence, individuals are more conservative across multiple dimensions than individuals with around 115 IQ. In other words, elite human capital fails once again. Intelligence predicts lesser conservatism up until they reach a certain threshold of 1 standard deviation above the mean. Afterwards, the situation is reversed, thus somewhat vindicating this famous meme. And so, based on that fact alone, a true Gigachad would be a moderate, drawing roughly 55% of his views from the left and about 45% of his views from the right, which is quite similar to this study by Noah Carl. But if you look at the individuals with over 140 IQ, the Gigachad crosses the right-wing threshold and basically becomes a centrist. Think of Daniel Bell or Francis Fukuyama, but slightly more to the right. But that is of course if we only take intelligence into account. The more variables are going to be added, the more clearer will the views of the Gigachad would become. Is this Gigachad a Mormon? Is he a registered Republican? Is he an Orthodox Jew? What about his race and sexual orientation? Sebastian Jensen has done a great deal of work in terms of answering that question by looking at various measures of Gigachad energy and political beliefs. But now, given the information that I've told you, what's important is that we've got all of the facts to determine the political ideology of a Gigachad ourselves, so let's do a little statistical analysis based on what's given. People at the top percentile of masculinity lean right in 68% of the cases. People at the top percentile of physical health lean right in 71.5% of the cases. People at the top percentile of mental health lean right in 79% of the cases. People at the top percentile of height and attractiveness lean right in 54% of the cases. We're skipping income, obviously, though it varies anywhere between 40% and 72%. People at the top percentile of intelligence lean right in 45% of the cases. And finally, people with the highest fertility rate lean right in 80% of the cases. Now, if you combine all of these odds together, we get a 77.6 chance of a person leaning right if he shares all of the aforementioned traits. However, if we were to convert these odds to probability, a Gigachad with the aforementioned traits would lean right in 98.7% of the cases. But here's the most important question. What does it mean? Sure, a Gigachad is a right-winger, that's clearly established, but what kind of a right-winger?
You love science, and I love Carl Sagan. 'Cause I think it's fly to look up at the sky and never ever stop wondering why there's nothing here to argue. I guess it's a process, not an ideology. I love science.
If we take a look at odds only and assume they scale with ideological commitment, then an odds of 77.6 would make a person to the right of center, but not right-wing enough to be far right. Whoever that person is, he's going to be strictly within the right-wing framework. Think of somebody like Matt Walsh or Charlie Kirk of 2025, not of 2015. They're not like Ben Shapiro or Konstantin Kisin.
I am a dark-skinned, first-generation immigrant to the UK. I don't play your racial games. Achenu
kol beis Yisrael, Acheinu kol beis Yisrael, Hanasunim betzara, betzara uvashivya, Haomdim ben bayam uven bayabasha. Hamakom yerachem yerachem.
But they're not like Keith Woods or Nick Fuentes either. They would be somewhere to the right of Dave Smith, but to the left of Paul Joseph Watson.
Well, imagine my shock.
In more simple terms, they would be right-wing but not radical, anti-egalitarian but not fascist, supportive of hierarchy, tradition and order, skeptical of individualism and socialism, possibly religious, and of course they would have strong and patriarchal family values. Historical figures with such views may include Vilfredo Pareto, Woodrow Wilson, T.S. Eliot, Nikolai Berdyaev, Edmund Burke, Roger Scruton, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Oswald Spengler, Russell Kirk, or maybe not, and promise me don't cringe, Leo Strauss and modern-day NRX LARP. Now, these aren't my inventions, this is what ChatGPT has told me based on my profile that I've constructed. Also, if you're wondering what further right looks like, it's going to be Carl Schmitt, the leader of the Romanian Iron Guard, fourth political theory of Dugin, classical fascism, but surprisingly the next phase of right-wing is going to be more moderate, then it's Ebola, Spanish fascism and Russian street fascism. Finally, the most far right you can have is the entire Nazi leadership, some American neo-Nazi LARPers, and of course a democratic Serbian president. I wonder how high would Benjamin Netanyahu rank. So as you can see, they're not doing a really good job predicting everything post 75 or post 80 percentile of right wing, mostly because there is a major flaw in how we discuss politics. Due to censorship, we can't properly represent the space between the 80 and the 95% mark. Everyone knows what the absolute extreme looks like, but whatever is next tier down, and whatever is more right-wing than Charlie Kirk, is barely known. This brings me to my last point about money and ambition. Remember what I said about money and personal interests? Well, we'll most likely have some form of a Patrick Bateman type of rightist who would trans-heart Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance. In other words, they'll prioritize technological advancement and modernism above populism while adhering to a conservative lifestyle at home. They may present themselves as one thing or another, but ultimately, like J.D. Vance, they are pursuing their own particular interests, whether in startups, networking, or something else.
I like to dissect girls. Did you know I'm utterly insane?
Evelyn. Great ass. Goes out with that loser Patrick Bateman. What a dork.
Another martini, Paul.
Their political views are going to serve their real-world ambitions. Ideology will be subservient to their ambitions, so expect some elasticity in jumping around the bush, but this elasticity will certainly not reflect upon their personal lives. Their behavior will always be socially conservative, because it is the most adaptive form of behavior in the current environment, hence why a Gigachad can only lean right, not left.